200 roaring Harley-Davidsons shook the quiet streets of Oak Haven, Nevada, rattling storefront windows and bringing local traffic to a dead halt. Leading the terrifying convoy of leather-clad Hells Angels was a man coming to collect a decade-old debt one a desperate, heartbroken waitress didn't even know she was owed. Rain slashed against the grease-stained windows of Rusty's grill like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry ghost. It was November 2016, and Oak Haven was enduring the kind of bitter, bone-chilling storm that kept sensible people locked indoors. Inside the diner, 26-year-old Maggie Sullivan wiped down the cracked vinyl of Booth 4 for the third time, her hands raw and smelling of cheap industrial bleach. Maggie was exhausted in a way that sleep could no longer fix. Her son, 6-year-old Leo, was currently bundled up in 3 sweaters on a cot in the manager's office, fighting off a chest cold. Maggie had exactly $42 to her name, clutching a final past-due utility notice in her apron pocket. If she didn't pay the electric company by tomorrow afternoon, she and Leo would be spending the weekend in the freezing dark. The diner was mostly empty, save for Deputy Miller. No scratch that Deputy Jenkins nursing a cold cup of black coffee at the counter, and 2 truckers arguing over sports in the corner. Suddenly the heavy glass door shoved open, letting in a violent howl of wind and freezing rain. Every head in the diner turned. The man who stepped over the threshold looked less like a human being and more like a force of nature. He was massive, easily standing 6'4", dripping wet and clad in heavy, scuffed black leather. His boots left muddy craters on the checkered linoleum. Beneath a soaked bandana, his face was bruised, a fresh, ugly gash, weeping blood down his left cheek. His knuckles were wrapped in crude, dirty tape, and the ominous winged skull patch on his jacket clearly marked him as a member of the Hells Angels. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the room. The truckers stopped talking. Deputy Jenkins slowly set his coffee mug down his right hand, subtly dropping to rest on the leather strap of his service weapon. The biker didn't look at any of them. He dragged his heavy boots across the floor and collapsed into Booth 7, right in Maggie's section. Brenda, the older waitress working the front counter, grabbed Maggie's arm. Her nails dug into Maggie's skin. "Don't go over there," Brenda hissed under her breath. "Look at him. He's gang muscle, probably on the run. Let him sit until he realizes we aren't serving him, and he'll leave." Maggie looked at the man. She saw the terrifying patches, the blood, and the sheer intimidation radiating from him. But she also saw the way he favored his left ribs, the slight, uncontrollable shiver racking his broad shoulders, and the hollow, dead-end exhaustion in his eyes. He looked exactly like her older brother had looked in his final days before addiction took him broken-cornered and entirely alone. Ignoring Brenda's warning, Maggie picked up a fresh pot of coffee, grabbed a thick ceramic mug, and walked over to Booth 7. "Evening," Maggie said, keeping her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She flipped the mug right side up and poured the steaming brew. "Terrible night to be riding." The biker slowly lifted his head. His eyes were a pale, piercing grey. Up close, he looked even worse. The cut on his cheek was deep, and he smelled of motor oil, copper, and damp leather. "Just the coffee." His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that barely carried over the sound of the rain. "I ain't got money for food." Maggie hesitated. Protocol dictated she take the coffee away and ask him to leave. Rusty, the owner, would fire her on the spot if he caught her giving out freebies to a gang member. But as the man wrapped his massive bruised hands around the hot mug, seeking its meager warmth, a sharp pang of empathy hit her chest. "You're bleeding," Maggie noted quietly. "Had a disagreement with a wet patch of asphalt," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. "Lost my wallet in the slide. Bike's barely running outside. Just let me drink this and I'll get out of your hair." Maggie nodded, but instead of walking away, She went straight behind the counter to the kitchen window. "Hey, Carlos," she whispered to the line cook. "Drop a full T-bone in the pan, medium rare. Add double hash browns, eggs, and a stack of pancakes." Carlos raised an eyebrow. For the hell's angel did he pay up front? Rusty said, "I'm paying for it." Maggie interrupted, pulling a wad of crinkled $1 and $5 bills from her apron. It was her tip money from the last 3 days. It was her electricity bill money. "Maggie, you're crazy." Carlos sighed, but he threw the steak on the grill anyway. 15 minutes later, Maggie slid a massive steaming platter of food in front of the biker. He stared at the plate, then looked up at her, his pale eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I told you I can't pay for this," he growled, defensive pride flaring in his posture. "And I didn't ask you to—" Maggie replied smoothly, sliding a bottle of hot sauce and a heavy set of silverware toward him. "It's been a long night. Someone backed out of an order. Eat it before it gets cold." It was a blatant lie, and they both knew it. The biker stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Slowly he picked up the fork. When he started eating, it was with the ravenous urgency of a man who hadn't seen a hot meal in days. Maggie left him in peace, returning only to refill his coffee. An hour later, the storm outside began to break. The biker stood up. He walked over to the counter where Maggie was wiping down the register. Up close, he towered over her, casting a massive shadow. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Maggie," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. The giant of a man reached into the inner pocket of his soaked leather vest. He didn't pull out a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a heavy, tarnished silver coin featuring a skull wearing a winged helmet. He placed it gently on the Formica counter. "I don't need payment." Maggie started pushing it back. "I told you, it ain't payment." He interrupted, his grey eyes locking onto hers with intense gravity. "It's a marker. My name is Wyatt, but my brothers call me Iron. You kept me from freezing to death tonight, Maggie. A biker never forgets. Remember that." Before she could say another word, he turned and walked out into the damp night. A moment later, the deafening roar of a modified V-twin engine shattered the quiet, fading quickly down the desolate highway. Maggie stood alone at the counter, staring at the silver coin. She pocketed it, feeling the cold metal against her fingers. That night, she walked home in the rain with Leo wrapped in her coat, knowing the lights would be shut off tomorrow. But as she held her shivering son in the dark the following evening, she didn't regret the lost money. She had done the right thing. 10 years is a long time enough to build an empire or watch one completely crumble to dust. For Maggie Sullivan, it was a grueling tug-of-war between the two. By 2026, Maggie was 36 and the proud, albeit deeply stressed owner of Sullivan's Bakery and Cafe. She had scraped, saved, and starved to buy the small corner lot on Main Street. It was a cozy, brick-walled haven that smelled of cinnamon and fresh ground espresso. Leo was now 16, a bright, fiercely protective teenager who ran the cash register after school. For a few brief, shining years, Maggie thought she had finally beaten the odds. Then came Warren Cole. Cole was a ruthless commercial real estate developer from Chicago who had turned his predatory gaze on Oak Haven. The town was expanding, and Cole wanted to bulldoze the historic Main Street to build a sterile, high-end outdoor shopping promenade. He had successfully bullied, bribed, and bought out almost every small business owner on the block. Except for Maggie. Her bakery sat directly in the center of Cole's proposed development. Because she refused his lowball offers, Cole made it his personal mission to destroy her. It started with anonymous complaints. Suddenly, aggressive health inspectors were showing up weekly, citing Maggie for fabricated infractions. Then her food suppliers abruptly cancelled her contracts privately, admitting that Cole's development firm had threatened to blacklist them if they sold flour and sugar to Sullivan's bakery. Maggie fought back. She drove 3 towns over to buy supplies in bulk. She worked 18-hour days to keep the kitchen spotless. But the financial bleeding was catastrophic. She had missed 3 mortgage payments. The final devastating blow came on a humid Tuesday in September. Maggie was in the back office, frantically punching numbers into a calculator, trying to figure out how to stretch her dwindling account balance to cover payroll. The bell above the front door jingled. She walked out to find Warren Cole standing in the center of her cafe, flanked by 2 hulking men in expensive suits. Cole was a sharp-featured man with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile that never reached his cold reptilian eyes. Maggie Cole purred, looking around the empty cafe with feigned pity. Place is looking a little tragic today. No customers. Get out, Warren, Maggie said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. You're trespassing. Actually, I'm inspecting my new asset, Cole said smoothly. He snapped his fingers and one of the suits handed Maggie a thick manila envelope. Your bank finally got tired of your missed payments. I bought your debt, Maggie. All of it. The commercial mortgage, the business loans. I own the paper on this pathetic little building. Maggie felt the blood drain from her face. She opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. It was true. A notice of foreclosure was stapled to the front. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate. Cole smiled, adjusting his silk tie. Or you can pay the balance in full, which is, let's see, $62,000. I'll expect the keys by Thursday morning. Don't take the espresso machine, it belongs to me now. When Cole and his men left, Maggie collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her flour-dusted hands. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears. 10 years of missing Leo's baseball games to bake bread before dawn. All of it gone. Mom. Maggie looked up quickly, wiping her tears. Leo was standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at the legal papers on the table, his jaw tightening. Did Cole do this? Leo asked, his voice cracking with teenage anger. It's over, Leo, Maggie whispered, the fight completely draining out of her. We lost. I'm so sorry. No, Leo shouted, throwing his backpack to the floor. We can't just quit. We can call the police. We can get a lawyer. With what money? Maggie snapped, instantly regretting it. She took a deep breath. The law is on his side. He bought the debt legally. Unless a miracle falls from the sky with 60 grand in cash, we're homeless by Friday. That night was the darkest Maggie had ever experienced. Unable to sleep, she sat in the dark cafe, packing small sentimental items into a cardboard box. She found an old cigar box under the counter where she kept mementos. Inside was Leo's first baby tooth, a dried rose from her late mother, and at the bottom, heavy and tarnished, the silver skull coin. She picked it up, running her thumb over the winged helmet. A biker never forgets. She let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. It was a nice memory, a reminder that she was once capable of pure kindness, even when she had nothing. But a silver token wasn't going to stop a bulldozer. By Wednesday afternoon, Oak Haven was buzzing with the news. The locals, though sympathetic, stayed away, too intimidated by Cole's thugs, who were parked in a black SUV across the street, watching Maggie's every move. Thursday morning arrived. The deadline. At 9 a.m. sharp, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up outside the bakery, followed by a moving truck and a local sheriff's cruiser. Warren Cole stepped out, looking triumphant. He held a clipboard and a shiny new padlock. Maggie stood on the sidewalk holding a single box of personal belongings, her arm wrapped tightly around Leo. She felt numb. Right on time, Cole sneered, walking up to her. I hope you cleaned the grease traps. Sheriff, if you please execute the eviction. The local sheriff, looking deeply uncomfortable, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Maggie. You got to hand over the keys." Maggie reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed against the cold silver coin. She pulled the keys out her hand, trembling. But before she could drop them into the sheriff's outstretched hand, a sound echoed in the distance. It started as a low, throaty rumble, like thunder rolling over the Nevada hills. Cole frowned, looking down the street. The sheriff paused. The rumble grew louder, shifting into a fierce mechanical roar that vibrated through the soles of Maggie's shoes. The coffee cups inside the cafe began to rattle against their saucers. Then, turning the corner onto Main Street, came the source of the noise. A motorcycle. Then 5. Then 20. Suddenly the street was flooded with heavy chrome and matte black machinery. 200 roaring Harley-Davidsons surged into town, a literal army of leather, denim, and muscle. The sheer volume of their engines was deafening, bouncing off the brick buildings and vibrating in Maggie's chest. They weren't passing through. The lead biker, riding a massive, customized road glide, raised his left fist. In perfect, terrifying unison, all 200 bikes cut their engines in front of Sullivan's Bakery. The sudden silence that followed was heavier and more intimidating than the noise had been. Cole's thugs instinctively backed up their hands, hovering near their jackets. Cole himself went pale, taking a nervous step behind the sheriff. The lead biker kicked his kickstand down. He was a giant of a man, his hair entirely silver now, but his broad shoulders and piercing grey eyes were exactly as Maggie remembered them. The ugly scar on his left cheek had faded into a jagged white line. He wore a heavy leather vest, the winged skull of the Hells Angels taking up the entire back. Below it, a rocker patch read, "President." Wyatt Iron Hayes stepped off his bike. Behind him, 200 of the most dangerous-looking men in the state of Nevada dismounted, crossing their arms and staring deadly holes into Warren Cole. Wyatt ignored the developer, ignored the sheriff, and walked straight up to Maggie. He looked down at the box in her hands, then back up to her face. "Hello, Maggie." Wyatt's gravelly voice broke the tense silence. "I hear you're having some trouble with your electric bill." Maggie stared at Wyatt, her mind struggling to bridge the gap between the broken bleeding drifter from a decade ago and the towering club president standing before her. Warren Cole scoffed, trying to mask his sudden intense terror with arrogant bluster. "Sheriff, are you going to let this gang interrupt a lawful eviction?" The sheriff didn't move a muscle. He was vastly outnumbered, outgunned, and possessed enough common sense to know that arresting the president of the Hells Angels in front of 200 of his loyal brothers was a suicide mission. Wyatt slowly turned his massive frame to look at Cole. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer menace in his tone made the developer take a frantic step backward. "You must be the parasite I've been hearing so much about," Wyatt said, stepping dangerously close to Cole. "Buying up debts, choking out family businesses, threatening suppliers. It takes a special kind of coward to wage war on a woman and a teenager." "It's business," Cole stammered, his bodyguards refusing to step forward, intimidated by the sheer wall of leather and muscle flanking Wyatt. "She owes my firm $62,000. The deadline was 9 o'clock this morning. She defaulted. The property belongs to me." "Not yet, it doesn't," a new voice rang out. From the front porch of the bakery, Leo stepped forward. Maggie gasped, realizing her son wasn't holding his backpack. He was holding his laptop. "Leo, get back inside," Maggie pleaded, terrified for his safety. Wyatt held up a massive scarred hand, signaling for calm. He looked at Leo and nodded respectfully. "You did good, kid." Maggie looked between her son and the biker, utter confusion washing over her. "Leo, what is going on? How do you two know each other?" Leo swallowed hard, his voice trembling but defiant. "Last night when you went to sleep, I found the silver coin in your box. I recognized the winged skull. I went online, onto a national biker forum, and posted a picture of it. I told them the story of how you fed a wounded angel 10 years ago, and I gave them the name on the coin. Iron. Wyatt stepped in, his gaze fixed on Maggie. My sergeant-at-arms woke me up at 3 in the morning to show me the post. When I realized it was you, Maggie, I made 3 phone calls. By 5 a.m., every chapter in Nevada was awake and riding toward Oakhaven. Wyatt turned his attention back to Warren Cole. He snapped his fingers. From the front of the pack, 2 massive bikers, one sporting a heavy red beard, the other with tattoos covering his face, dismounted and hauled 3 heavy olive-green military duffel bags off their motorcycles. They dropped them directly onto the sidewalk at Cole's polished shoes. The heavy thud echoed in the tense silence. "What is this?" Cole demanded, his voice cracking. Wyatt reached down, unzipped the first bag, and pulled out a thick, rubber-banded stack of crisp $100 bills. "This is $62,000 in certified untraceable United States currency, raised in exactly 4 hours by the brothers of this club." Wyatt tossed the stack of cash. It hit Cole square in the chest, forcing the developer to catch it awkwardly. "Your firm demanded payment in full to satisfy the debt," Wyatt growled, stepping so close to Cole that the brim of the developer's expensive haircut practically brushed Wyatt's leather cut. "Consider it satisfied. The debt is paid. The bakery stays with Maggie." Cole sneered, his greed warring with his fear. "You think you can just dump dirty gang money on the street and make this go away? I refuse this payment. I want the property. Sheriff, this money is obviously illicit. Confiscate it." The sheriff cleared his throat, looking at the cash, then at Wyatt. Before the lawman could speak, a slender, sharply dressed man stepped out from the sea of bikers. He wasn't wearing leather. He was wearing a sharp grey suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase. "Actually, Mr. Cole," the man said, adjusting his glasses, "under Nevada state law, Title 8, commercial instruments, a creditor cannot refuse a legal tender payment that satisfies a debt in full prior to the physical execution of an eviction. Furthermore, this money was withdrawn legally from the club's licensed charity fund, which I manage." Cole's eyes darted wildly. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Mr. Hayes's legal counsel." The lawyer smiled tightly. "And I'm also the man who spent the last 3 hours digging into your shell companies, which brings us to a much more interesting conversation." The street was so quiet, you could hear the wind rustling the awning of the bakery. 200 bikers stood perfectly still, their eyes locked on the cornered developer. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of printed emails. While my client was gathering funds, I made a few inquiries. "It seems your development firm, Cole and Associates, has been sending written threats to local food suppliers, promising illegal kickbacks if they boycotted Sullivan's bakery. That constitutes felony racketeering and corporate extortion." Cole's face drained of all color. He looked at the printed emails in the lawyer's hands. He was trapped. Wyatt leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper, meant only for Cole. "Here is how this is going to work, Warren. You are going to take your duffel bags of cash. You are going to sign the release of the deed right here on the hood of your fancy car. Then you are going to get into that car drive back to Chicago, and you are never going to set foot in Oakhaven again. If you ever look at this bakery, if you ever breathe in Maggie Sullivan's direction again, my brothers and I will pay you a personal visit. And we won't be bringing cash." Cole swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the silence. The 2 bodyguards had already backed away silently, resigning from their jobs right on the sidewalk. With trembling hands, Cole took the clipboard from the hood of his Mercedes. He signed the release documents, legally discharging the debt and returning full ownership of the building to Maggie. He handed the clipboard to Wyatt, ordered his men to grab the duffel bags, and practically sprinted to his car. The Mercedes tires squealed as Cole sped out of town, leaving the moving truck and a bewildered sheriff behind. The sheriff tipped his hat to Maggie, muttered a quiet congratulations, and quickly drove away, wanting no part in whatever was happening next. Maggie stood on the sidewalk entirely stunned. The legal documents rested in her hands. The bakery was hers, free and clear. The suffocating weight that had crushed her chest for 6 months vanished in an instant. Wyatt turned to his men. He raised his fist high into the air. 200 bikers erupted into cheers, howling and revving the engines of their bikes, celebrating the victory. The deafening roar of the Harley-Davidsons echoed off the brick walls, no longer a sound of terror, but a symphony of absolute triumph. Wyatt turned back to Maggie. The hard, dangerous edge had melted away from his face, replaced by a gentle, profound gratitude. "I don't understand," Maggie whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the towering man. $62,000. You didn't even know me. I just bought you a steak and a cup of coffee. Wyatt took a deep breath, looking down at his worn boots before meeting her eyes again. 10 years ago, Maggie, I was at the end of my rope, Wyatt said quietly. I had lost my wife to cancer. My chapter was falling apart. I got into a fight that night on the highway and I just gave up. When I walked into that diner, I was looking for a place to get out of the rain before I went out to the desert to end my own life. I had a loaded pistol in my saddlebag, and I had fully intended to use it. Maggie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Then you walked up. Wyatt continued, his voice thick with emotion. You were exhausted. You had nothing. I saw you pull your tip money out of your apron. You gave up the only money you had to feed a dangerous, bleeding stranger who had nothing to offer you. You didn't judge me. You just showed me grace. That meal, that kindness, it reminded me that there was still good in this world. It gave me the strength to get back on my bike ride home and fix my life. He reached out and gently placed his large, calloused hand on Leo's shoulder. You raised a smart boy, Maggie. He fights for his family, just like you do. Maggie threw her arms around Wyatt's massive waist, burying her face in his leather vest, sobbing in pure relief and gratitude. Wyatt awkwardly but gently returned the embrace, wrapping his massive arms around her. The debt is paid in full, Maggie, Wyatt whispered. You never have to worry about the cold dark again. Later that afternoon, the streets of Oak Haven looked entirely different. The intimidating convoy of bikers hadn't left. Instead, they had parked their bikes and flooded into the bakery. Maggie and Leo were behind the counter, laughing as they served massive quantities of pastries, coffee, and sandwiches to the leather-clad giants. Wyatt sat in a corner booth, quietly sipping a cup of black coffee, watching the chaotic, joyful scene unfold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tarnished silver coin. Leo had handed it back to him before they opened the shop. He smiled, tossing the coin onto the table. The universe had a funny way of balancing its scales. A simple plate of food had saved a man's life. A decade later, an army of outlaws had ridden through the storm to save a mother's dream. Some debts are paid in money, but the most important ones are paid in loyalty. And a biker never forgets. Did this incredible story of karma and unexpected biker loyalty give you goosebumps? True kindness always circles back when you need it, most often from the people you least expect. If Wyatt and Maggie's journey touched your heart, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good still exists in the world, And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life stories. Leave a comment below with your thoughts.